Welcome to the Science for the Public lecture series. Science for the Public is an organization committed to bringing science information and issues to the general public. Visit our website for our program listings and blog.
Good evening. I'm Yvonne Stapp for Science for the Public, and I welcome you to Contemporary Science Issues and Innovations. Our guest tonight is Kamal Bawa, Distinguished Professor of Conservation Biology at UMass Boston and founder of the famous Conservation Institute, Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, ATREE, in Bangalore, India. Professor Bawa grew up in India. Soon after receiving his PhD at Punjab University, he became a research fellow at Harvard, then joined the biology faculty at UMass Boston in 1974. He served as chair of that department from 1989 to 1992, and in 1996 received the special title Distinguished Professor of Biology, and in the same year he established ATREE. Dr. Bawa has a very long list of awards and distinctions, some of which we've listed on the page for this event on the Science for the Public website. These include Distinguished Research Fellowships at Harvard, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the UMass Chancellor's Award for Distinction in Service. He is also a fellow of numerous prestigious societies and has served as counselor or president of major organizations for biology and conservation. Dr. Bawa is the author of many professional papers, textbooks, and monographs on tropical biology, and with the famous nature photographer Sandesh Kadur, he has produced 2 award-winning books on the Himalayas, which he'll describe for us tonight. Both books have been cited particularly for the brilliant combination of photographs and text that bring the unique region of the Himalayas to the world and the general public. A major focus of our discussion tonight, however, is the acclaimed ATREE Conservation and the research center founded by Dr. Bawa in Bangalore. This institute has introduced an innovative approach to conservation, education, and social justice. Dr. Bawa will talk about the urgent need to preserve tropical hotspot regions and his innovative strategies for training both researchers and the general public in conservation. We are very honored to have this international hero to help us understand both the need to preserve tropical ecosystems and the ways in which communities can contribute to such efforts. Welcome, Dr. Bawa.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by asking you what tropical hotspots or hotspots are, to begin with, these biodiversity hotspots.
Tropical hotspots are areas of the world in which there is a very high number of species, unusual richness of life. There are about 34 hotspots of biodiversity identified all over the world. One of those hotspots is actually in the US, in California, and as I mentioned, there are 33 other hotspots throughout the world. Very large number of plant and animal species. Another distinguishing feature of hotspots is that the rate of degradation is very high in these hotspots. And so 2 characteristics, the number of species and the rate of degradation, define a hotspot.
Oh, I see. So it's not just the life, but the threat to the life at this time.
One a positive feature, and
yes,
another
and one
a negative
very
feature.
Negative feature, and therefore hot for that purpose. Then you and Sandesh Kadur have taken on a project to develop a couple of outstanding books that have gotten a lot of praise on the several hotspots in India, correct? Can you tell us about those hotspots and about the book projects?
India's landmass covers 4 hotspots of biodiversity. One is along the western coast of India called the Western Ghats. The other, of course, is the famous Himalaya. The third one is the Indo-Malayan region at the border between India and Myanmar or Burma. And the fourth one is a series of islands in the Bay of Bengal called Andaman and Nicobar Island. The southern group of these islands is a part of the hotspot that covers Indonesia. The 2 major hotspots are, of course, the Western Ghats and the Himalayas.
Okay, so these are they're very interesting in all sorts of communities, the life, the flora, the fauna, and the human communities there too, I guess. But when you set about to make these fabulous books, these gorgeous photography books with text, what was your purpose in doing this? Because you've done so much scholarly work.
Right. I think one of the motivation was to bring to life really this tremendous amount of richness of life to general public. Of course, there is a danger when you do this sort of thing by means of coffee table books, because coffee table books are expensive. India is a poor country, but nevertheless, by these books, you can reach the libraries, you can reach the private sector. And more importantly, you can reach the policymakers and decision makers. And people in India, when they see these books, they are really very surprised to see that all these unusual plants and animals are all around them. Western Ghats, for example, is literally the backyard of the city of Mumbai, a very large city.
Yes.
And technically, the Western Ghats area includes the city of Mumbai.
That's very hard to imagine.
Yet people of Mumbai have no idea that there is so much diversity all around it. So when people of Mumbai see these books, they find it very hard to believe that they can travel a few kilometers and enjoy all this diversity of life. And of course, the books received a lot of attention from the Prime Minister of India and from the President of India. And I have an interesting incident to report. In a way, once I met Minister of Environment and Forests of India, and he said, "Oh, Dr. Bawa, I was reading your book on the Western Ghats last night." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, you know, I have a conference to address in the morning." And so I think the book summarizes what is known about the biodiversity there, so it's very convenient. And I was, of course, pleased to hear that. But when I said that he was reading it last night, I wondered, you know, why he was doing it. Because my book is not, I didn't think, was supposed to cure insomnia.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
So I think anytime you have such people taking interest in the work, you know, then you feel that you're reaching the decision makers.
Right, and as they are made more available in library systems and so forth here as well, then people see an area that they had no idea was so incredibly beautiful. But then these are very, in a sense, fragile ecosystems, I take it. What's happening to these, because that was a motivation evidently for writing the books as well. What's happening to these exquisite ecosystems?
As I mentioned earlier, biodiversity hotspots are defined on the basis of rates of degradation. In these parts of the world, the loss of natural habitat is occurring at a very, very high rate. There are many factors responsible for that. Population, population expansion, land use change caused by development, by conversion of land for agriculture and for other purposes, for human use. So there is a wide variety of factors, and we don't understand these factors fully. We know that there are 3 or 4 factors in a given area might be responsible for that. What is the relative contribution of each factor? I think it's hard to study. I mean, you can, but there is very little work in that area.
And some of the projects include things like the hydroelectric dams. Is that true, that these seem large-scale farming and so on? And we're not terribly aware of that here. We're aware of it in the United States and to some extent South America, but not in that region, which we think of as more pristine. But
yes, construction of hydroelectric dams, I think, is one of the examples of how development of infrastructure can cause damage to the environment. In the case of Himalaya, there is really a very heavy spree of dam construction. Both India and China are growing at a very fast rate. The rate of economic growth in both countries during the last 2 decades have averaged very, very close to 8 to 9%. And so there are huge demands for energy in both countries. And as a result, they are both trying to tap the waters of the rivers flowing out of the Himalaya. I think we have to keep in mind that Himalaya is the source of 8 largest rivers of Asia. So there's a lot of water. There are approximately 400 dams being constructed on the Indian side of the Himalaya, and another 400 dams on the other side in China. And of course, we all require energy. I think what is happening with the dam construction is that there is no proper environment impact assessment. Secondly, even if one has to construct the dams, there is a lot of things we can do in terms of preventing ancillary damage. It's not only the construction of the dam. Construction of the dams requires labor. It requires construction of roads. And so you have not only the area covered by the dams, but also all the roads that are leading. And how much care you take. There are various ways of constructing roads. There are various regulations that need to be met. Very often, the regulatory regime is not fully functional in both the countries. And there are landslides and so on and so forth. And finally, let me say something about the labor required to build the dams. There are places where population, small remote places in the Himalaya, where population has quadrupled.
Because of the
in just a matter of 2 years, 3 years, because of all the labor that has been brought in to build the dams. And they put tremendous pressure on natural resources and so forth. So there are a wide variety of ways in which such damage can be minimized, even if one has to construct the dams.
Right. But it seems to be ignored for the most part
Right.
as a worldwide problem,
Right.
as a matter of fact, with that push for energy. Could I step back for a moment to just ask about that diversity that's being threatened by all of this intrusion? For people like you who are concerned to get this on record before it's all gone, then how do you see this ability of these species to adapt, even though they have a great variety among themselves? Can they adapt fast enough?
The process of adaptation is somewhat slow. Evolution generally occurs at a slow rate.
Right.
The changes are occurring at a very fast rate.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not only that the environmental conditions are changing, but also when the habitat disappears, a number of populations are lost. Populations become smaller in size.
Yeah.
And there, even if one is able to adapt, by the time adaptation occurs, the number would be reduced to just a few individuals.
Right.
That their survival will be questionable.
Right. The other thing that's happening in that region, as well as elsewhere in the world, is the climate change in general. And I wonder how that has affected temperature changes or rain cycles and so on. How is that affecting these two areas like the Ghats, the two Ghats?
Not so much in the Ghats, not to say that the climate change is not significant there,
Mm-hmm.
but it has not been very well examined. But for the Himalayas, I think we have a lot of data on the magnitude of the climate change. I shouldn't say a lot of data, but comparatively speaking, more data than we have for the Western Ghats. Also, in the Himalaya, you have a lot of glaciers.
Yeah.
Himalaya is, as you know, also known as the third pole.
Yeah.
Because of the amounts of ice locked up in the Himalayan glaciers.
Right.
See, we know that those glaciers are melting at a fast rate.
Yeah.
The rate is very variable. In the Western Himalaya, they are not melting at that much of a faster rate as they are in the Eastern Himalaya. The temperature is increasing. Our own work shows that the temperature in the Himalaya has increased by 1.5 degree centigrade during the period which we studied was from mid-1980s to mid-2000s, and it's sort of a 20-year period.
Right, right.
And that is 3 times more increase than the global average. And the rainfall has become erratic. And all this is likely to change the hydrology of the rivers.
Right.
And that is one thing, when people planned these construction of these dams, they didn't take into account the changes in the hydrology due to climate change.
So this is a big problem because now you have, I guess, species that can't get up and move or change or get air conditioning or whatever it is that they need for adaptation. So it sort of magnifies the threat.
That is right. I think in many parts of the Himalaya, I have seen the rivers as we know them, they have ceased to flow because a series of dams have been constructed. And this, again, is likely to have just a huge impact on the aquatic biodiversity.
Okay. You can imagine this accelerating, so it seems as though there are many areas of the world where conservation biologists are having trouble just keeping up with it. They can't really predict very well because of this acceleration, which is hard to predict. And do you find this too? Do you?
That is true. I think we face many challenges. One is the number of people who study conservation biology is relatively small. Secondly, we have not fully documented this biodiversity. Thirdly, this biodiversity is being lost at a very rapid rate. Certainly at the habitat level, the ecosystems are getting transformed, the ecosystems are disappearing. Understanding the drivers of change is a complex issue. So we are not able to keep pace with all that is happening. And the amount of knowledge we really need to collect, we are not able to gather.
Now, you set up ATREE, evidently not necessarily anticipating this particular situation, but that is quite a unique institute, and I wonder if you could tell us about that. One of the things that I would like to talk about is this innovative approach to training of the scientists and doing the work and also training a community, apparently. Well, anyway, tell us about ATREE and how it functions.
Okay, that's a very
big subject, I know.
Big subject, and I think your question, let me break your question into smaller components. First of all, ATREE stands for Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment. Acronym is ATREE. I set up ATREE because I felt that not only in India, but throughout the world, our approach to biodiversity loss was somewhat naive. There are a bunch of biologists who are trying to understand the distribution of biodiversity and then what is driving the loss of biodiversity. The loss of biodiversity, the factors that are responsible for disappearance of biodiversity are complex. And they are primarily social and economic. So I felt, along with, of course, many others at that time, that we require an interdisciplinary approach to the issue of biodiversity loss, that we have to not only look at the ecological dimensions of decline in biodiversity, but also social, human, and political dimensions of this loss of biodiversity and the consequences of this loss to human societies. It was mid-90s, and I was working with a group of people who were from different disciplines in one particular area of southern India. There was sort of an economist and who was also a very good social scientist or had a good understanding of political processes too. And then I was working with a person who had a background in banking, and he had a good sense of business and also economics. And so we developed a very interdisciplinary project in Biligiri-Rangan Hills of the Western Ghats to look at the use of forest resources by local communities and how at the same time we can enhance the rural income of this particular group and also conserve biological diversity or sustainably or develop a mechanism that will lead to the sustainable use of the resources they were taking from the forest. So basically, that was the beginning of an interdisciplinary approach to a very complex problem on my part. And then I also felt that in order to make progress, you cannot work on a project-wide basis. You have to create an institution. And I decided to have this, establish this Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, or ATREE, a very interdisciplinary center. And so we are taking a very interdisciplinary approach to the problems.
And what do you do in that center then? You train scientists, and what do you do in there?
We first and foremost, we generate new knowledge, knowledge that can be applied right away to some of the pressing problems we face. Second, we want to ensure that the knowledge we are generating has an immediate impact. It can have an impact on the policymakers, or it can have an impact on the ground at the grassroots level, on the communities of the areas where we are working. So one of the unique features we have is that we try to bridge the gap between knowledge and policy making on one side, but also between knowledge and action on the ground on the other side. And also bridge the gap between policymakers and the local communities in which we are working.
You mentioned the local communities, which is one of the interesting things, and I'm not sure that viewers will be familiar with the local communities, but I understand that there are communities that go back, I don't know, hundreds of years and so on, correct? Right. And you have diversity of communities as well. They must be under threat in the same way that the biodiversity, the ecosystems are as well. What can you do for those communities you're attempting to preserve them too, and to engage them in preserving the biodiversity? Is that the idea?
Yes. I think in these two books you mentioned earlier, I think one of the unusual features of these books is that they are not only about different types of plants and animals, but also different indigenous groups that inhabit the area. And we know that richness of biodiversity is very much correlated with, at least in case of India and other parts of the world too, with ethnic and cultural diversity. So these indigenous groups, both in the Western Ghats and the Eastern Himalayas, have remained somewhat isolated, not completely, but they have remained somewhat isolated and have managed to preserve or conserve their cultures, their traditional practices, and so on and so forth. And I think this is what you are referring to. With the biodiversity loss, we are likely to lose a lot of our cultural heritage. It is well known, for example, many of the languages in many parts of the world that are rich in biodiversity have been lost. And that has happened in India too. So what can one do? I think that is one of the major challenges the conservation biologists face, because our traditional approach has been to declare an area which becomes a protected area, a national park, or a reserve, and then we don't know very much, as to what to do with people who have been living there. And so the approach we are trying to follow, and it's difficult, it's not an easy task, to see how we can integrate concerns of the people with the concerns of the environment. can we simultaneously conserve these cultures as well as biodiversity, and again there are a wide variety of ways where possibly one can do that. But the first and foremost is for the people to have power over their fate. I think some of that power has been lost, and as we all know, to some extent, political power comes from economic power, and these people are very poor.
Yeah.
And there is the issue of social justice you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Rights issue, rights over land, because many of the areas that have now become protected areas were their original lands, native lands, and how to bring some sort of balance where they have their rights, where we are able to conserve biodiversity, as well as we are able to make people's lives better.
So that's one of the objectives of ATREE, is to try to
I wouldn't say that
engage these people or protect them too, or
yeah, I would say one of the objectives. One
I understand. Right.
One of the objectives is to work with the indigenous people, to work with the forest dwellers, as there's another phrase we can use, to see how through economic power or by realization of the exercise of their rights, things can be improved.
Do you have a way of training the environmental scientists as well, conservation scientists, through this organization?
Yes, ATREE has a very vibrant doctoral program.
Yes.
And doctoral program is one of its kind, especially in Asia. It's very interdisciplinary, and it's a program in conservation and sustainability science. And we currently have about 43 students enrolled in this doctoral program. The degree is given by Manipal University, but all the recruitment of the students and their training and the coursework, that is all designed by the faculty of ATREE.
That, it seems to me, is one of the best aspects of the whole organization. It's very appealing. Now it's becoming more common, perhaps, to give people cross-disciplinary training, much more comprehensive training, a lot more field training, and so on. But it seems to me you were way ahead of the game when you got this started. Are people doing this sort of thing, developing this mode of training people now in your field?
There are challenges. I think, and we are facing those challenges too in our faculty. And as you know, some of those challenges we also discussed at our talk at Harvard a week ago. But we are making progress. And I think what is encouraging is the attitude taken by the young generation. They don't want to be disciplinary oriented. You know, they want to address complex problems. They want to take these challenges, and this is very encouraging. And if one were to look at the problems ATREE doctoral students are addressing, one sees how well they are in integrating, you know, either the human or policy concerns with very high quality natural science.
Right, it's a very interesting way to go.
Right.
I noticed that you have a kind of special course. Is that a spin-off from the ATREE mentality?
Yeah. I think this semester we are offering for the first time this course in sustainability science, which really addresses the complex issue of associated with sustainable environment, what is sustainability science, and how we can bring together natural and social sciences to bear upon some of the complex challenges we are facing in the field of environment and issue of justice, issue of equity, and so forth. The course is going very well. We are
I'm
having
sure.
a very good time.
Yes, right. This is like a new direction for training people in this field now, and much more comprehensive. Do you, and I close with this, but do you foresee an interest in training the public, in opening this sort of thing to the public, of addressing these very complex issues in some way that would be accessible to the general public?
Oh, absolutely. I think in case of ATREE, we have a lot of interest in developing a sort of a citizen science program.
Yes.
And I think citizen science program, we have had discussions here too.
Yes.
In the university, and I think there is a tremendous interest in those types of programs.
Right. And I'm hoping you'll sort of develop one. I think that it's a wonderful area, a field that it sort of invites citizen science, but it also gives us, in the non-experts, an opportunity just to appreciate complexity and to learn how to analyze things in a rather different way. And so I'm hoping that we'll do more of that. You will do more of that. You have been a great innovator, and it's a great pleasure to talk with you about it. We really appreciate your coming by and telling us about your work. And I wish you all the luck in the world with it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.